the last several episodes, we've been having an ongoing discussion about the role of mining in the consensus voting mechanism that backs Bitcoin, as well as the role of application-specific integrated circuits and whether those lead to centralization. So in response to some of that discussion, we had a really interesting back and forth on Reddit, and I've invited Gavin Andresen, Chief Scientist of the Bitcoin Foundation, as well as, of course, the lead developer for Bitcoin, for a little conversation about mining, consensus, and ASICs.
Hey, Andreas, nice to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time. It's really great to have you on the show and quite an honor. Let's dive right in. What is the role of mining and the voting process or consensus process in making decisions about the future of Bitcoin?
The future of Bitcoin? I think that's a little grand. I mean, miners, and when I say miners, I really mean people who are creating blocks, so who are choosing which transactions get validated and which ones don't. Most miners, obviously, today are part of mining pools, and so it's really the mining pool operators who control, the blocks that miners are creating. I think that will change as time goes on. We're already seeing some movement to, giving the individual miners more control over which transactions are put into the blocks that they solve. But that's kind of a side subject as to, how much decentralization can we get with the way mining currently happens, and how is that going to change in the future? And, as always, I like to see it more decentralized if possible. But I mean, really, the only thing that the people who are deciding what transactions go into blocks, they're deciding on which transactions are accepted and which ones are rejected if there are double spends, which transactions languish and which ones get confirmed quickly. So really, that is what they have direct power over. Now, if you can get a bunch of miners together to actually get 51% of the network, then, they can do more. But they can't actually do a whole lot more. And I think that's where kind of our argument or disagreement comes in how much power do they really have?
From what I understand, if they have more than 51%, the main thing they could do is orchestrate a limited double spend against someone. But kind of the long game, which is more the voting or consensus over big features or controversial decisions in the code, that really has nothing to do with it, right?
Pretty much. I mean, any controversial features, and there have been some that have been controversial, we'll have to go through a process of getting consensus of the mining power. We made a change to support multi-signature transactions. What was that, a year or two ago? That was somewhat controversial because there are a couple different ways of doing it technically. We went through a long process of basically getting consensus, getting everybody to agree on one way of doing it. And once it became clear that, a majority of people, well, more than a majority, a super majority of people agreed on, this is the way we're going to go, then there's a very strong incentive for everybody to come along and do it. So, it's even more than just getting a simple majority. You really do need kind of overwhelming consensus that, this is the right thing to do. And there have been less controversial changes that have been rolled out that, nobody's really batted an eyelash at, that have gone through the same process. And we're actually in the middle of that right now with, the fix to the blockchain fork that happened back in March. We're actually in the middle of a hard fork that will fork off old both miners and merchants, any miners or merchants that haven't upgraded to the 0.8 release. We actually haven't hit the fork yet. And that was a non-controversial thing to do because, there was a bug, it has to be fixed. Everybody realizes it's a bug, it has to be fixed. And so, it's really easy to get consensus on a change like that. Any change that's controversial, and I think the next change I think that's going to be controversial that I'm going to be pushing for is increasing the block size. That's going to be a long, drawn-out process where before it happens, it's going to be obvious that, a supermajority of people want it to happen.
In a way, Gavin, from what you're describing, it sounds like one of the big parts of this process is really achieving consensus between developers, users, miners, and the broader community long before the decision of which version to choose actually has to be made, or even more so, the window closes and that decision is now enforced, as you described with the '07 clients that are going to get dropped.
Miners can't just unilaterally decide, we want this change, right? I mean, they could, but then they're going to wind up with Bitcoins that aren't accepted by merchants, that they can't trade for dollars at exchanges, that, they basically wind up with worthless Bitcoins. It does the miners no good if the only people they can trade their Bitcoins with are other miners. So you really do need, this consensus between, not just the miners, but miners and merchants and users and, pretty much everybody in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
At a macro level, that's really the confidence, essentially, behind the currency is the same as the confidence behind the code, the network, the developers, the miners, the entire system, right? You have to have confidence in the whole thing.
Exactly, yeah. And compatibility between different implementations. As Bitcoin grows, it will become harder to get consensus just because it's bigger and there are more people involved.
Now, we've clarified that the 51% really has very little to do with this particular thing. That's really a corner case of a double spend scenario. But if we took the theoretical scenario, this is completely hypothetical, but I just want to understand from a technical perspective how it would work. If the ASIC concentration, if you like, the fact that ASICs allow much more efficient discovery of blocks, and because there's limited supply at the moment, this is driving concentration of mining to at least a smaller subset of the overall population than if everybody could CPU mine. If an adversary or a party that had interest not in gaining from Bitcoin but in stopping it was able to take a substantial proportion of the hashing of the network and then just pull out, does that not create a dangerous scenario for resetting the difficulty, for achieving consensus, or for sustaining Bitcoin?
Possibly. I mean, I'm really not worried about ASICs. I know Jeff Garzik, another core developer, has been tweeting with a hashtag, not worried about ASICs. The marginal cost of producing an extra ASIC once you've actually got the design and gone through tape out and all the other hardware stuff is like $1. So, this is why we're starting to see, a flood of ASICs from these companies. And we're seeing, prices plummet as we get competition happening. And so, if it costs you $1 to get a mining ASIC, it suddenly seems not such a big barrier. And you can start to imagine, maybe these ASICs are just going to be ubiquitous and will be everywhere. And we'll be, right back to, I don't even need to buy a laptop to mine Bitcoin. I can just buy a little dongle that it maybe attaches to my cell phone to mine Bitcoin or whatever. Who knows? That's why I'm really not worried about ASICs. I think we are in a time in Bitcoin's life where, theoretically, there could have been a ASIC company that cornered the market and decided to 51% attack Bitcoin. And, maybe governments will look back and say, gee, if only we woulda, we coulda killed it. But, we now have several ASIC manufacturers. I know there's been a lot of speculation about, there are only a certain number of state-of-the-art fabs in the world that can really produce the very best ASICs. And, isn't there a danger that they will control the world market for Bitcoin? And that seems like paranoid fantasy to me, too. I mean, those same fabs are what's producing all of our computers. And you haven't seen, the Chinese government try to corner the market on computer production. If they did, I think you'd see fabs built and spring up other parts of the world. So, again, I'm just not worried about it. I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2010, and there's always been a worry of what if a government does this or what if a government does that? And it hasn't happened yet, and I really don't expect it to happen. I think I have a lot of confidence in entrepreneurs moving quickly and creating great stuff a whole lot faster than these supposed enemies of Bitcoin can do. There's just so much energy and excitement and now money flowing into the Bitcoin world and Bitcoin startups that again, I'm just not worried.
By the time governments figure out that Bitcoin really is as disruptive as they feared, it will be too late. So, I'm not particularly worried about the government attack, more so just as overall trends. And in response to Dan Kaminsky's comment about the proof of work algorithm, I think the ASICs tend to centralize this function more so than algorithms such as script, where it may give less of an advantage to an ASIC. Do you see any worry about that? That perhaps there's not enough incentive for adoption as there would be if everybody could use their own CPU to do a bit of mining too?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we're going to see really cheap Bitcoin mining hardware, on the order of just a few dollars.
So that's
because again, if you can buy some mining hardware, or even better, if you can buy, a space heater for your office that also mines Bitcoins, or a cell phone charger that plugs into the wall that also happens to, have a little Bitcoin miner built in, maybe. Who knows? I don't know what innovative products entrepreneurs are going to come up with. I think those are the kinds of things that are going to happen. I mean, one really interesting thing that I saw recently is Intel building in SHA-256 instructions to some of their chips, which is really interesting because, really, when you get down to it, Bitcoin mining will become all about, what is your cost of power and how efficient is the hardware that you're using. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter how many gigahashes or terahashes you have. If I could make a little bit of money, maybe running a process in the background on my state-of-the-art Intel chip while it's otherwise idle, why not? If it gives me a net positive return based on, how efficient the chip is versus how much I'm paying for electricity, then I might do that, even if it's only, a couple dollars a month. If it doesn't cost me anything and I make a little bit of money, why not? And if you have, millions of people all over the world, potentially billions of people all over the world doing that, then suddenly you have, this incredibly decentralized Bitcoin mining, even more decentralized than we have today. That would be ideal best case scenario, right? I mean, if everybody's getting, a few dollars worth of Bitcoins a month, that'd be a huge support to the Bitcoin economy, right? Everybody would have a few Bitcoins to spend after a year. So, I don't know if that's going to happen. I can't predict the future. I'm a technological optimist. Again, I have a lot of faith in entrepreneurs. So, I think the future looks really bright.
Fantastic. I would very much love to see some T-shirts with hashtag just not worried about ASICs. A very good, I think, insight from that particular discussion, at least for me, was the fact that eventually the difference in efficiency has kind of a marginal utility. At some point, you just get diminishing returns. You've got it down to 25 nanometers, and then what? SHA isn't a very complicated algorithm. You can only make it so efficient before you're essentially looking at the only difference between you and every other miner is how much your local electricity company charges.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and, there are countries in the world where electricity is subsidized. Those might become huge hotbeds of Bitcoin mining, although, I don't know how long that would be sustainable for the government if they, are subsidizing the Bitcoin economy indirectly just through electricity prices.
But certainly it will align the incentives for finding the most efficient, least cost use of energy possible in order to support this activity.
Exactly. And maybe eventually to, reuse the waste heat. You may see, Bitcoin cogeneration plants where, huge mining farms where the excess heat is also used for something. And, I know nothing about energy cogeneration, but I know that, there's a whole business and there's a whole economy in, energy cogeneration and putting waste heat to good use. So, I think we'll see that happen too.
Yeah. If you combine it with Steam, it would be a very, very nice cyberpunk kind of retro thing.
That would be a fun place to visit, some huge cyberpunk steam-filled.
Well, New York City uses a lot of steam for heating, and they produce that by burning natural gas. So I think mining hardware would be a better approach. Thank you so much for helping us understand the complexities of mining.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. Hi, Stephanie here. Would you like to turn your book into an enthralling audiobook? Need a persuasive commercial to promote your company? How about a narrator for your explainer video? Here's where I can help. I'm a freelance voiceover artist, and since 2009, I've lent my voice to dozens of audio projects. To hear some examples of my work, check out my website, smvoice.info. If you like what you hear, I'd love to be the voice of your next project. Get in touch at smvoice.info.
I'd like to turn over to another subject just briefly and talk about some of the developments that are going on in terms of the upcoming 0.9 version of Bitcoin, and specifically some of the payment protocol extensions that you are proposing and that are going to be built in to make merchants' life easier. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Sure. This is actually something I've been working on for quite a while. Mike Hearn and I did a lot of brainstorming and working on a few Bitcoin improvement proposals, BIPs, that describe a payment protocol that lets your Bitcoin wallet software basically talk directly to a merchant that you're interacting with. And the idea is to just basically give a better checkout experience, give a better experience to the user when they buy something using Bitcoin. So these are all changes, not at the kind of low-level core level of the protocol, but kind of at the higher level on the user interface level at the Bitcoin Qt level. So all of the code that I've written is actually part of Bitcoin Qt and not kind of the core network. So I know Mike Hearn has been excited about getting payment protocol support into Bitcoin J, the Java library that several of the Bitcoin wallets that run on mobile devices use. Hopefully we'll get support from all of the wallets, and then we'll need support from all of the big merchants and exchanges for the payment protocol. So, getting the reference implementation done and pulled into the Bitcoin 0.9 release is really the first stage in the process.
This set of 3 Bitcoin improvement proposals and the protocol that's wrapped around that, from what I understood, it's more managing the workflow around essentially presenting a bill, requesting a payment, making that payment, and giving a receipt. Is that a good description?
Yeah, I should probably say what the users will see. Right now, when you pay for something using Bitcoin, well, usually you probably copy and paste a Bitcoin address. For my grandma, that's not a great user interface. You can actually click on a Bitcoin link that basically copies and pastes the Bitcoin address for you. But the payment protocol extends that so that, you click on a link to pay, and then you're actually told, do you want to pay this number of Bitcoins to, and then you're given an actual name of a website instead of this, long, complicated, scary-looking Bitcoin address. And all of that is supported behind the scenes by the same public key infrastructure that we're all using every day on the web, which is the X509 certificates. And so, when you pay, it will say, do you want to pay bitpay.com, or do you want to pay, Satoshi.com? If you're a big enough geek like I am, you can even arrange things so that you have a personal certificate. And so it would say, do you want to pay Gavin Andresen at gmail.com, which is kind of cool. And, I'd like to see, eventually we'll have Bitcoin wallets that have some support for, getting personal certificates in a really easy way that it doesn't require you to jump through a bunch of hoops. And so we get more identity into payments, which can be really important for trust. It gives the person paying more confidence that they're actually paying who they think they're paying. One of the big problems with a Bitcoin address is if you transmit it over an insecure channel, it's possible that there could be a man in the middle who replaces the Bitcoin address with, their Bitcoin address. And then instead of paying the person you think you're paying, some evil guy who's just trying to steal that payment. By using the public key infrastructure system, that can't happen. In the same way that, visiting an HTTPS website, to visit an HTTPS website, you have a lot more confidence that, that you're not being redirected to some attacker's website.
And certainly a merchant would be much more concerned about a man in the middle that was able to redirect hundreds or even thousands of incoming payments. That's much more serious perhaps from that perspective than the consumer who perhaps misplaces one payment. It's the other end kind of amplifies that effect.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing, lots of business in a day, then even one day worth of lost revenue because payments got misdirected is a big deal.
And just to clarify, X509, of course, we're talking about not just the same technology that's used for SSL certificates, but also the same issuance, institutional processes, and validation, identity verification process. That whole infrastructure, the organizational infrastructure that comes with SSL, can be reused for these protocol messages.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's been somewhat controversial because everybody hates that infrastructure. But the truth is it works. It's what we have. There's billions of dollars worth of internet commerce that's based on that infrastructure. And so, it's kind of the worst system there is, except for anything else that's out there. So the payment protocol has been designed so that if a better system comes along, we can really easily, trash the whole centralized certificate authority system and replace it with something better. I'm hoping somebody will step up and do a PGP key infrastructure replacement for it, just as a proof of concept. That certainly could be done. Could use the PGP Web of Trust that only geeks use as your public key infrastructure system, and the payment protocol, would support that as an extension. Of course, all the wallets and all the merchants would also have to support that, and I don't think they're going to, just because that system has not been successful in, kind of getting to the mainstream. But, we are thinking ahead, and we are trying to make it so that if a fantastic decentralized identity system happens, that, we can glom onto that and just start using that instead. Decentralized technologies are always preferable, when there are decentralized technologies that work.
Sometimes the decentralized institutions are a big part of that. And just being able to go to someone like VeriSign or someone else and getting a personal certificate or company certificate, that having that infrastructure already there is pretty important.
If we had to reinvent all of that, there's no way it would happen. That's just, too many years in the making to just junk all of that.
One final question. I know something else that was being discussed for 09 or for imminent edition soon thereafter is BIP 0032, which is the hierarchical deterministic wallets. We've talked about HD wallets on the show before. We're big fans of that technology. Is that going in 09? And also, is that compatible with this new payment protocol?
It's not going into 09. It's just working on the wallet code. That and the core code are really sensitive and dangerous. So, I think all of the core developers are a little bit wary of wading in there. You make a mistake and people lose money, and that's terrible. It will take a lot of thought and a lot of care. Redesigning the wallet is high on my personal wish list. Support of HD wallets would certainly be part of that. The payment protocol is kind of wallet agnostic. It doesn't really care what technology you're using for, generating where to send payments. And so it should be completely compatible with.
Would feed it HD wallet-based addresses in the requests and use both technologies with great synergy.
Yeah, it actually doesn't have addresses inside of it. Everything's done in terms of kind of the lower level pay to scripts.
All right.
But yeah, essentially it's the same thing as addresses, just at a lower level, is so that more sophisticated versions of the payment protocol that kind of automatically generate payment addresses based on the payment information itself can happen. This is an idea. There's an academic paper by Timo Henke and I'm forgetting the other person's name, but they have a very interesting system for, generating really secure payments on doing some fancy elliptic curve encryption math on the actual data in the payment, which is really exciting and neat. And, payment protocol version 2 hopefully will support that, because that would be pretty nifty from a technological point of view. From the kind of user interface and customer's point of view, you won't notice any difference, whether it's an HD wallet, one of these fancy elliptic curve computed addresses, or a plain old just I generated 10,000 payment addresses and that's what I'm going to use on my web server kind of wallets.
Just hope you're using a good random number generator, and everything else should be fine.
Don't get me started on random number generators.
With us today, we have Gavin Andresen. Chief Scientist of the Bitcoin Foundation and also lead developer of Bitcoin, who gave us some great information on ASICs mining and consensus voting, as well as the new payment protocols in 0.9. Gavin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed listening to the show.
Well, that's a great honor, and we hope to have you back soon. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. Sean'sOutpost.com.